such an honor to have the chance to talk with you today about really meeting our collective aspirations for peace and sustainability, inclusiveness, and in short, how to prepare our students to shape a changing world for the better. I had the chance just a few months ago to spend some time here in Armenia with my colleagues from Teach for Armenia, visiting a community in the north of Armenia in a region called Lior, which is next to the Georgian border. And we had headed to this community to try to understand the purpose of education in the minds of the educators and students and families in this community. And it was a really inspiring visit where I got to meet this incredible principal. You can see him at the head of the table, a very young man who had grown up in the community we were visiting, had gone away to college, had come back to teach, had taught for 8 years and was then appointed to be a school principal. And you can see he hosted this incredible Armenian lunch for us. And over lunch, we were engaging him in this question of, what is it that you're working towards for kids? And it was kind of amazing to listen to his thoughtfulness around that question. He shared with us that he was working to help his students appreciate their Armenian identity and have a sense of strength from that. And at the same time that he was working, and I'm quoting him directly, to ensure that they grew in their appreciation and love for all of humanity so that they could be global citizens committed to making their own community and their own country and our global society better. I mean, it was so powerful. And then to visit his schools and realize that his teachers, in fact, were teaching with that exact purpose in mind. I think the slide got a little bit condensed, but this was a poster board in the back of one of the first classrooms we visited, and it captures the intention of the teacher in that room who was working to help her students deeply understand the local context and values and culture, while at the same time gaining the skills that they would need to navigate a changing global economy. So the reason this community was so inspiring to me is that at every level, from the principal to the teachers to the other students and families we met, there was such thoughtfulness. I mean, they had really considered what they were working towards in education. And what I've seen in my work across Teach for All is that this is a very rare community. So as you heard, Teach for All is a network of organizations all around the world in 53 countries and growing, that are each working to galvanize the rising generation of recent college graduates, promising leaders in their countries, to channel their energy into teaching initially and ultimately leading the change in education for the most marginalized kids in their countries. And so I get to travel the world and visit schools all over the world. And what I've seen is that while our world is changing and our aspirations are changing, our schools are not changing. So this is a picture from one of my most recent visits to Afghanistan, where I got to visit these incredible teachers. This particular teacher was working mightily to ensure that her students attained what they needed, but she was working in a classroom structure that is probably indistinguishable from what we would have seen, decades ago, and what we would see in really any region of the world. So I think it's so interesting. I mean, in my own home of New York City, just a couple of weeks ago, the world convened at the UN meetings, the annual meetings of the United Nations, and we talked about our aspirations, our aspirations for our planet and for peacefulness and for an inclusive economy. And I just think about the real disconnect between the aspirations we spend a lot of time thinking about and the discussions that we have in education. So what we need to be thinking about is, of course, our aspirations for what we want the world to be, and also the changes that we're experiencing in our world. Our economy is changing so much. We've maybe all read study after study from McKinsey and Company and others about how hundreds of millions of jobs will be eliminated in the next decade alone due to automation. We consider other societal challenges, the degradation of our environment, and many other challenges that today's young people will need to be prepared to fight. So we need to be thinking about all of this, about our aspirations, about how the world is changing when we think about what we're working towards in our schools. As we've considered this across the Teach for All network, we've been struck with really a revelation that it's not enough to catch up the most disadvantaged kids, the kids we're working with, to the most privileged kids in terms of where they are in their education, that's not enough. That we need to be working to ensure that all of our kids are prepared to really shape a changing future. And so we've come together around this vision that by 25 years from now, we will have whole communities enabling all their children to have the education, support, and opportunity to shape a better future for themselves and for all of us, so that those communities can inspire and inform a worldwide movement to do this everywhere. Now, in order to accomplish this vision, we're going to need to consider many questions, as I mentioned. First of all, what do we want to be true for our communities, our countries, and our global society? What does this mean for what must be true for our young adults? And what does that mean for education? We spend a lot of energy across Teach for All asking ourselves who it is who should be considering these questions. And what we believe is that it should be a lot of people. One constituent who simply has to be at the table is our students themselves. Just as the rest of us adults have new expectations for our own engagement and participation in decision making and such, our students have those expectations as well. And what better way of fostering this rising generation's sense of agency to make the world better, their awareness of themselves and the challenges in the world and what needs to be done to address them, their skills and competencies that they need to solve problems and to navigate a changing world, their values, what better way than engaging them in thinking about reshaping the schools that they're attending every day? So one person who's been a real inspiration for me is the founder of Teach for India, who's such a visionary and has created something called the Kids Education Revolution. So what they're doing is identifying student leaders all over India, and they're bringing them together and investing in their leadership development, just like some organizations invest in the leadership development of adults. And they're helping them envision new schools, like to use a design thinking process to envision new schools. And then those students orchestrate a summit, and this is a picture of a summit I visited in Mumbai last year, where they invite thousands of educators to learn from them as students. And sitting in that audience and engaging with the other teachers, veteran teachers, some of whom have been teaching for 20 or 25 years, I watched their mindset shift about what students need and about what we can expect from our students, and articulate that they would be walking into their classrooms teaching differently as a result. So we need our students and our educators working together to consider these questions. We need our employers who know what skills kids will need to have meaningful careers in the future at the table. We need our policymakers who are so attuned to their aspirations. We need all of them stepping up from the box, the educational box that we're in today, to consider really what we should be working towards in education. And again, I've been so inspired by the folks here in Armenia who have undertaken over the last few months to bring dozens and dozens of people, from students to educators to local community members and employers and political leaders together to consider exactly these questions. they've undertaken what I've come to call the 25-year-old project. They essentially went about asking themselves, by the time our kids are 25, what needs to be true for them? And they got to that answer by asking, what do we want to have be true for our communities and for Armenia and for our global society? What are the challenges we face? What are the opportunities we face? And they articulated a vision for student success. And this is their vision, which in essence is about, their students being able to provide for good lives for themselves, to lead positive change in their communities, and to ultimately work towards a strong Armenia that has makes a significant contribution to our global welfare. And then they step back from that vision to consider the implications for the education they provide. So they're working to provide an education that is rooted in the strengths of Armenian history and values, that elevates the voices of students and cultivates their leadership in a way that's responsive to the revival of democratic principles in Armenia, and that also equips kids with the knowledge and skills they'll need to thrive in a global economy. So I imagine what it would be like if in communities all over the world we engaged in 25-year projects, meaning we got all of our constituents, from students to parents to educators to again, employers and other citizens, to step up and consider these questions. What do we want to have be true for our community, for our country, our world? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities that we face? And therefore, what are the implications for our education system? If we could engage in those 25-year projects, finally, we would break out of these educational boxes that we're just kind of unthinkingly and unreflectively working to check. So I want to leave you with something that very inspiring school principal in Armenia shared with us when we were visiting his community. I think he was such a brilliant man. He said, if we want to have a brighter future, to have a better society, we should pay attention to the education of today's students. This is so profound. It is so obvious. This can't be new to anyone in this room. We all know this is true, right? We need to act with this understanding.